Geoffrey Baer is an 8-time Emmy Award-winning public television writer, producer, and program host, known for feature-length programs about the architecture and history of Chicago, including most recently Chicago by L, the Great Chicago Quiz Show, and Beyond Chicago from the Air. He also hosted the PBS series 10 That Changed America about the built environment across the country. In his new special called The Most Beautiful Places in Chicago, Jeffrey introduces viewers to the creators and enthusiasts who tell the stories of how these innovative and uniquely magnificent spaces and places across the many neighborhoods of Chicago came to be, and why they're meaningful to the people who live and work nearby, and why we should all know their histories. But first, here's a glimpse of the special.
Whether it's the clean modern lines of Frank Lloyd Wright and Jeannie Gang, where do you start? Unbelievable. Or the over-the-top opulence of styles from history.
It's an engineering marvel.
Yes. There are so many astonishingly beautiful treasures in the city and suburbs, from artfully crafted landscapes, to surprising hidden gems, to breathtaking views of arguably the most beautiful skyline in the world. Oh my gosh. Wow. Woven together, it's a tapestry that represents the rich diversity of Chicago. Join me as we explore the most beautiful places in Chicago.
Geoffrey Baer, welcome.
Oh, pleasure to be here, virtually.
Before we talk about your new program, I discovered something new about you last night at an event at the Chicago History Museum. You taught drama in the West Loop back in the day. If you don't mind, please tell the listeners about that.
Yeah, I was on the faculty. I was a high school teacher. I was on the faculty of the it was called the Chicago Academy for the Arts. It was Chicago's private high school for the arts. It still exists. This is not Shy Arts, which is the public school for the arts, but it has since moved to a different location. But when I was there from 1984 to 89, it was the old rundown Catholic school building that had been abandoned behind Old St. Pat's Church at Adams and Des Plaines. So my classroom, you looked out my classroom window and right there was the Kennedy Expressway, and right across the expressway to the west was Greektown.
I thought it was super cool. And, you know, again, another connection that you have to this amazing city. So kind of fun, I thought.
Yeah, I had a previous brief TV career in commercial TV in different cities around the country. And then I got out of television and I got a master's degree in theater at Northwestern. And then this teaching job kind of fell in my lap, and I taught for 5 years and then got back into TV.
That's a good run. That's a good run. So your crew sent me an advance copy of the most beautiful places in Chicago. I was actually going to put together a map of all the locations that you visit because you really cover a nice spread. You go, you're downtown, you're Chinatown, you're in Albany Park, you're at the former Southwark Steel Mill on 87th Street, you're in Oak Park, Bartlett, and so much more. How did you settle on these locations?
Yeah, so did we really find the most beautiful places in Chicago? Obviously, there are far more than I could have ever gotten into one show. But I think it's extremely important to us to reflect all of Chicago and the region and not just downtown, for example. So that was very important to us as we were picking different locations. You know, I mean, the origin of this, in my mind, is just that I every time I've been doing these shows about Chicago for public television, WTTW, for more than 25 years, and in every single show, I come across a place that's at least one that you just can't even believe it's in Chicago. You know, a beautiful, sacred space with incredibly stunning, gorgeous interior or a beautiful park that, is a kind of a hidden gem. And I thought, wow, I think it would be kind of cool to have this all in one show, and a lot of places that I didn't know about too. And so, we did start with a lot of options. I put the word out to, I have developed a lot of contacts over the years, and just put the word out to people I knew. If you were going to take me to a place that you think is one of the most beautiful places in Chicago, what would it be? And of course, we got probably 100 ideas of places that we could include in the show. And then, the process was narrowing it down. And I think narrowing it down in a couple of ways. One way was just, is it just visually beautiful? Is it just surprisingly gorgeous? Like you can't believe your eyes. That's kind of, baseline. But also, what's the story behind the place? And the other thing about this show that's different, I think, than a lot of my shows is we've really leaned into the people who are showing us these places. So, is the person who's going to take me there a good talker? Can they really capture what's so meaningful about this place? Not just its visual beauty, but what it means to that person and to Chicago, that makes it beautiful. And then thirdly, as I've already said, does it kind of reflect a wide, broad Chicago and not just some narrow particular area?
Well, I do want to get back to people in just a minute, but I have to say, I'm not normally like a huge architecture guy. When people go, "Oh, you know who designed that building, right?" I rarely know. But watching your
Tommy Henry, the
programs,
Chicago History Podcast, rarely knows.
listen, if this was the Chicago Architecture Podcast,
Okay.
then maybe, yeah. But seriously, your programs encourage me to look at these buildings and places in a different light, which I'm sure is part of your goal. Do you hear that a lot?
I hear it all the time.
Yeah.
The refrain I've probably heard the most in my career is, gee, I walk by that building all the time and I never noticed that, or I never looked up and saw that. Architecture was kind of my first love. It was kind of my doorway into this. Was when I trained to be a Chicago Architecture Foundation docent. Now it's called the Chicago Architecture Center, in 1987. And even before that, I took some architectural history in college and studied in Europe and got to see things firsthand. And it's always been a big love of mine. So I kind of went the other way from maybe what you're talking about. So I backed into the history through architecture, because that was where my first kind of excitement and interest was.
Now, if I had the dates right, did you apply to become or learn to become a docent while you were teaching drama at the arts high
Oh
school?
yeah,
Oh, wow.
I did. So what's funny about that is, so I'm teaching theater at the High School for the Arts. It's the mid 1980s, and we just took our kids on a field trip one day. It was just the school was right just west of the Loop. It was on Adams Street, just a few blocks west of the Loop, and so we took them on an architecture tour. I don't even know who booked it for us. One of my fellow teachers. And I was so turned on by this Chicago architecture tour. After the tour was over, the docent, it was funny. The docent really didn't know how to use his voice.
Mm.
So he was yelling like this through the
Oh,
whole tour.
boy.
And by the end of the tour, he was talking like this. And we took him out for coffee afterwards. My colleague and I said, we're theater teachers. We can teach you how to use your voice so you don't wreck it after an hour and a half long tour. For one thing, you need to breathe. But then I turned the tables on him and I said, "But by the way, what is this architecture tour thing?" And he told me about the Chicago Architecture Foundation and that they have a docent training program. And boy, I signed up right away to be. It was a volunteer thing. So I started volunteering. The docent training was incredible. I mean, you get this amazing college level course in Chicago history, Chicago architecture, architectural history, and then you write your own tour, and you're critiqued, and you have probationary period, and you have to pass, through that. So it's quite rigorous. Um, and so yeah, that was before that was 2 years before I started at WTTW. I've been here since 1989.
Hmm.
So
And you still
34 years.
docent today, yes?
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm still I'm a sustaining docent, which means I
Oh,
don't have to give quite as many tours as a full-on docent.
they
But
cut you
yeah,
some slack after nearly 35 years. No,
more
I'm
than
doing
that,
my
yeah.
math wrong, but yeah, it's pretty close. One of the things I learned watching the most beautiful places in Chicago, St. Regis, currently the third tallest building in Chicago, features something called blow-through floors.
Yes.
For listeners, what are blow-through floors and why are they used?
So the St. Regis Tower is right along the Chicago River, very close to the mouth of the Chicago River, kind of across the river and a little east of Tribune Tower, east of Michigan Avenue. And it's very, very tall and very slender. And so tall, slender buildings, all really tall buildings, will sway in the wind. You can even perceive this to some degree. People have talked about it when you're at the top of the Hancock or the Sears Tower. You'll notice like the water might be jiggling a little in the glass, or you'll feel a little something. But so they come up with strategies to mitigate this tendency of buildings to sway, because they don't want them to sway too much. Not that they're going to like fall down or anything, but it's disconcerting to be in a building and feel it moving. So Jeannie Gang's team did some research and analysis, and they figured out that the third component of the building that extends the tallest up into the sky was just going to sway too much. And so they eliminated 2 floors. They basically, there were, it was tough for the real estate folks. There were going to be condos on those floors, but they took out the windows, and they, left the floors open air, so that the wind blows through the building instead of pushing against it. And I will add that the building also has another device inside, which other buildings in Chicago have as well, which is called a tuned mass damper. So in addition to this open floor, this blow-through floor, there's a giant pool of water in a tank on the top of the building. And when the building sways one way, the water in the tank sloshes the other way, and this tends to counterbalance the sway of the building. It's called a liquid tuned mass damper.
Do we know
And
how
by
much?
the way, you mentioned the blow through floor, because in the show, no one's allowed to do this. They allowed us to go and film the blow through floor. So imagine,
It
like,
looks crazy. It looked
yeah,
crazy.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine being up on the top of the Hancock building in the sky deck, and then they just took out all the windows. So, it's just like a
Yeah.
low railing up there, and it's just open air.
Yeah. Well, St. Regis also has, I discovered this watching your program, has the highest residential unit in the city.
It
Do you
does.
recall off the top of your head what the asking price would be for that unit?
The guy who took us through the building said 19 million-ish.
Yeah, yeah. So I think it's going to be a couple more podcast episodes before I'm going to be able to afford that. So
Great view.
yeah.
Great view.
You mentioned Jeannie Gang, the architect who designed the St. Regis. You talk to other architects about their inspiration. You speak with artists like Roman Villarreal and Nick Cave, and also a Tribune Tower lobby greeter named Melissa Hubert Degra. I'm sure my French teacher from high school would be angry that I
That was
butchered her
terrific.
name. Yeah, maybe close. Who I thought was great. For those who don't know, what is the cool thing about the Tribune Tower lobby?
So the lobby of the Tribune Tower, Tribune Tower was designed, that was the winner of a design competition to design the most beautiful building in the world. And it's really kind of a monument to the great Chicago Tribune publisher, Colonel Robert McCormick, and his ego. So he was quite a character. And the lobby is this monument to freedom of the press. So if you go into the Tribune Tower lobby, past all the sort of gargoyle-looking figures that are called grotesques, etched into the walls are all these pronouncements about freedom of speech and freedom of the press. I mean, they're literally carved in stone into the walls. The wall, it feels a little like you're going into a Gothic cathedral when you go into this lobby. It's got a wood beam ceiling, but then on the walls and actually even engraved on the floor are these pronouncements about the power and value and importance of freedom of speech and freedom of the press. And you mentioned the lobby greeter. They call them, the Tribune Tower is residential now. It's a condo building, and so this woman in the lobby, who essentially somebody we might have used to call a doorman, or but she's a greeter. They call her an ambassador. She wears a little uniform, and she sits in this lobby all day long and looks at these etched paeans to freedom of the press. And she spoke so eloquently about, visitors will come into the lobby who come from countries where they don't have those freedoms, where they could get thrown in jail for saying something against the regime. And she thinks about that as a person who sits and reads these inscriptions about the freedoms that we have in our country. And that's something that I found so powerful and delightful about this whole project, this whole search for the most beautiful places in Chicago to make a TV show about that for WTTW, was meeting these people and hearing their what these places mean to them. I found that it was so much fun talking to her, but it was also very moving talking to her.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it comes across nicely. I mean, honestly, seeing the buildings discussed in the program from the outside as you drive past is one thing, but then having the opportunity to see them from the inside, I thought was a treat. One of the ones that you cover is Northeastern University's El Centro building, which listeners, it's a big building on the east side of the Kennedy, just south of Addison or north of Belmont, I guess, depending on which way you're headed. I learned a whole bunch about sound design with buildings like this with your talk. The architect is Juan Gabriel Moreno. Because truly, I looked at it and thought, how do they have a university that is that close to the expressway and get anything done? I live a block away from the L and I can hear it, more than I want to. So I learned a lot about that, which I thought was pretty great. You guys didn't mention it, but there's a great drone shot of the El Centro building that shows what appears to be hundreds of solar panels on top of the roof. Which, you got to love a college building dedicated educating immigrants that also has a focus on renewable energy. Thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, sustainability now is a huge component of all construction. I mean, there's some unbelievable percentage. We don't think about this. There's some unbelievable percentage of greenhouse gases that comes from buildings.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of embedded carbon in buildings when it comes to all of the building materials that had to be fabricated for them to build the building. So there's just a whole protocol now about all the ways in which you try to mitigate those things. I love that building. This is a building, if you've seen it on the Kennedy, it kind of curves with the Kennedy, and it's this very kind of weird modern looking building with these kind of blue and yellow fins on the side of it, and it cuts inward at an angle at the bottom. And I say in the show, it causes some distracted driving on the Kennedy. So I really wanted to see that building up close. I've passed it a million times. I've literally probably gotten closer to being in a crash than I wanted to by trying to look at it as I'm speeding by on the Kennedy. But when we got there to film the interview, anytime you film with a TV crew, they always want to find the quietest location, right? Oh, this is too noisy. And I said to the sound recordist, sorry, but I want to be on the highway side of the building because that roaring highway noise is part of the story. Like, what did Juan do to mitigate this roaring sound of the highway? So I wanted that sound behind my voice and behind our voices, in the interview as I was interviewing Juan, and he, I set him up, and he was right there. I said, "What was the biggest challenge?" He said, "Well, we're hearing it now, the highway," and I was like, "Yay, we got it into the show." But obviously, when you watch the show, you can see how they some tricks that he used, and this is another guy who again talks about not just the beauty of the building, and if you like modern architecture, it's really beautiful, but the meaning of the building. That yes, I'm going to put this building right on the edge of the highway, and it's going to be like a billboard advertising the fact that here is a school giving immigrants, that's glorifying education for immigrants. And Juan also said, every neighborhood deserves what he calls uplifting architecture, not just downtown. And it's really a mission of his to do sort of dramatic, he said, I like buildings that jar you, that make a statement when you look at them, that make you kind of amazed. In every neighborhood deserves uplifting architecture, he says.
That's fantastic. So, from the first day of filming to when it is shown on WTTW, how long does it take? How many people are involved in these productions?
It takes about 8 months
Hmm.
to make one of these shows. So my colleagues in Spot News are like jealous, because they get about 4 hours. Um, and I pretty much just do it all myself. No, not kidding. I was so blessed on this project. So there's the sort of extended family, like the people I'll put the word out into the community, and I get a lot of my contacts and people giving me ideas. So there's that sort of extended family, but we do have it's a small team. We have a producer. Her name is Bridget Sarno, and who's worked with Oprah Winfrey and others. An associate producer whose name was Tim Farron. So that's kind of the two of them, and me are the main sort of content production team. We go out in the field with a small crew, an incredibly gifted director of photography. It's the first time I've ever worked with him. He's a guy named Oral User, and you will see in the show. I mean, it is so gorgeously filmed. It's just unbelievable. And then a sound person goes out with us, so I can tell them I want to interview someone next to a highway, and they can go out of their minds. And we have an editor who was brilliant, Jeff Landsman, who lives up in Deerfield. We have composers who work on the project, and then there's a big there's a wonderful production team here at WTTW, who do other things, but they're contributing to our project in all the sort of infrastructure ways here at WTTW. And then of course there's a whole web team too. Because these projects are not just TV shows. There's a whole website that's part of the project too, where you have there's a self-guided audio tour on there. There's a slideshow of some of these beautiful places, so they go by quickly in the show, and you can really get a better look at them. There's a web exclusive feature because there's an artist in the show who also did this guerrilla art where he carved a mermaid out of some of the blocks of stone along the Chicago, along the lakefront, in the sort of dark of night, not in the dark of night, but he didn't have permission, let's put it that way. And we tell the story of the mysterious mermaid. So there are these things on the web as well. So there's a web team. So there's, when you start to break it down, there's fundraisers, marketing and publicity, you do end up with a kind of a big team, but a small core of us that are responsible for most of the creative content.
Well, and they've all supported you nicely because this really is a gorgeous, gorgeous production. Were there places for one reason or another that were unwilling to grant you access to film with them?
Um, I'm, when you've asked that question, I do feel like I'm not going to be able to remember where it was, but there was a place, and I was kind of like, really, you don't want us to show your
You just
place?
kept pointing at your own face saying, "Do you know who I am?
Yeah.
I'm Geoffrey
No,
Baer."
I mean, we're not doing like hardcore investigative journalism,
Yeah,
we're
sure.
so we don't tend to have too much trouble on my kinds of shows having cooperation from people allowing us to come and film.
Yeah, I guess I was curious as to whether you might have picked a place. They said, oh, based on timing, we're going to be doing some renovations and it's not going to work out or
Yeah,
something like
no, I
that.
mean, yeah, boy, I don't know if you'll want to include this or not. I cannot remember what the place was,
Hmm.
but I think there was a place that we had really wanted to do, but they were in the middle of some renovation, and it just wasn't going to work because the renovation wasn't going to be done in time. I will say that there was one of the sacred spaces in the show, and there are some amazing houses of worship in this show, like you can't believe your eyes. One of them, the KAM Isaiah Israel Synagogue in Kenwood, they're kind of embarking right now on a construction project. So I know that we had to shoot around some scaffolding, kind of shoot over here but not over there, in order for us to capture the beauty of it.
Toward the end of the program, you say there is more beauty in the Chicago area than we can possibly fit in one program. May listeners expect a part 2 of the most beautiful places in Chicago? And if so, when?
Well, we're not talking too much about it yet, but yes,
Oh,
there will be a part 2.
mm,
I will say this: the reality is we filmed so much for
mm,
this show that as we got into the process of trying to cram it all into one show, we felt we were going to just give everything too much short shrift and not really let people see the beauty. So we've already kind of partially shot a show number 2.
mm.
And almost actually mostly shot a show number 2, and we're considering that for the fall of this year.
Well, listeners, you've heard it here first.
That's
Uh, the
right.
mo- the most
Tommy
beautiful
Henry exclusive.
The Most Beautiful Places in Chicago premieres Tuesday, March 7th at 7 p.m. on WTTW and through streaming on WTTW.com/beautiful places and the PBS app. Geoffrey Baer, as always, thanks for your time and what you do to bring the sights and stories of Chicago to viewers.
It's my pleasure anytime.